Welcome to Cougar Conversations. This week, George Lindsey is our guest, and he joins us from Houston. Hey, George, good to see you.
Hey, Mark. How are you, sir?
Doing very well. Pleasure to talk with you again. I have it on good authority that not only are we talking GCHS 50, but we're talking GL radio career 50. Just last week, you celebrated 50 years in radio.
How crazy is that? But yeah, I started right there at that microphone at that radio station when I was 15 years old in September of 1974 with Dave Thompson and Barry Downs and all the guys that were there at the time guiding me. By the way, it was me, John Asher, and Daryl Duval all started about the same time there. They were there a little bit before me, but yeah, 50 years, and it all started right there at that studio, man.
What a great class of talent, kind of a who's who, I know. And there have been so many good alumni come through our building that we're extremely proud of that. I heard you mention on Friday morning during the ceremony about your 50 that your dad drove you from, I guess, Dog Creek to get to work.
Yep. My dad would drive me up there and would sit in the car and wait for me to finish up at night. And then I had to, Mark, I had to take the garbage out and burn it. There was an incinerator kind of thing. So I had to take all the AP paper and all that stuff out and burn it every night. And then as soon as we got that done, my dad would take me home. But yeah, he drove me back and forth to work for the first 6 months that I worked there until I was able to get my license at 16.
So obviously that gives me your age, because I was wondering, so if in September of 74 your dad was driving you because you weren't yet 16, what class would you have been in then at Grayson County High School?
So I graduated in 1977. I was the first sophomore class to come into the new consolidated school. My freshman year was at Caneyville. And Mark, I got to tell you, man, I remember the trepidation and all the rumors that were going on about this big consolidated school that they were building. And we were going to have Clarkson folks there, and we're going to have Litchfield folks and the Caneyville people. And coming from Caneyville School, which, by the way, was kindergarten through 12th grade, all in one building, and sometimes all in one hallway. It was a little overwhelming to think about going to this big new building that they were building for Grayson County High School. But man, once I got there, and some of my best friends in life have come from Clarkson and Litchfield and all the different places that came together. And I think it was, it was a different time, obviously, but man, the way that everybody pulled together those first few years to create something called a Cougar for Grayson County, and they weren't Red Hawks anymore, or they weren't Flashes anymore. It was really special to be part of that first classes that were there at Grayson County.
It's interesting that you share that. A couple of weeks ago, Dale Woosley was our guest on Cougar Conversations, and he was specific to point out that, you met people that you weren't going to meet, and in ways you married people you weren't going to marry pre-consolidation. So that transition was an important one, and it made what we now think is a small world bigger than it was. And for you, I guess it's interesting because growing up in the Dog Creek area, when you said you were going to town, you meant you were going to Caneyville. So to go all the way to Litchfield, it had to be a big transition.
You know what? It's funny that you say that, but absolutely, going to town was absolutely going to Caneyville. We went to Litchfield a couple of times a year, and usually it was back to school shopping, and we'd go to Arnett's right there on the square, and we'd do our back to school shopping, and we'd go to Western Auto, or if we needed something, but it was honestly, we only made it to Litchfield a few times a year. Most of the time was spent in Caneyville, and Dale is absolutely right. It expanded that world, and I think it's hard for people to understand that when you have social media now and you're friends with people on the other side of the planet. But But I mean, it was a very closed community, I think, for everyone in Caneyville, Litchfield, and Clarkson schools. It was a very closed community and fierce rivalries between all three of those two. So for that to come together, I think as quickly as it did it's a great testament to some of the leadership that they had there. And Mr. Ray was the first principal, and he was somebody that you didn't want to mess around with. He was a kind of a by the books kind of guy, but he really built that community that was at Grayson County and became the community of the high school.
So we've talked about some travel logistics, obviously, from the margins of the geography of the community. You talk about maybe some rivalries that were brought to a centralized location. Were there other challenges of consolidation that you remember other than those two specific ones?
You know, I think the biggest thing was, and this is going to sound crazy again in today's world, but the time difference in getting to school. You know, before it would take 10, 15 minutes to drive from our house on Dog Creek to the Caneyville school there. And now all of a sudden you were having to do 30 or 45 minutes. And before I had my license, the very first, start of the school year there, the very first year of Grayson County, I was riding the bus. And I mean, all of a sudden the bus ride was an hour and a half, an hour 45. And so that was a big, big change. I know for me personally, and for my brothers and sisters at the time too, that were younger than me.
Well, and we both know that's where you learn a lot about life is on the school bus.
What did LB Shane say? I learned about life in the back of the school bus in Grayson County. Yeah. I mean, he has a song about that. Yeah.
That's right. Well, by the way, he was our guest last week, so we've got back-to-back Dog Creek.
By the way, great interview. Great interview. LV is amazing, and you are so great at interviewing people.
So I had the pleasure to interview Mr. Ashby earlier in the season. He was one of our early Cougar conversations, and he's just a wealth of knowledge and such a treasure. But he's someone important to you as well.
Yeah, changed my life. I mean, changed my life all the way back when I was in the 7th grade at Caneyville High School. And Mr. Ashby came on as the band director and was looking for somebody that was big enough to carry a tuba. And so he convinced me that I should be in band. And I went to my parents, and Mark, I remember them talking about how they were going to get the money to rent an instrument for me to be in band. We couldn't afford to buy an instrument, but we rented a trombone to start with, and I got started in band. And Mr. Ashby, I mean, it's not an exaggeration. He really did change my life in exposing me to things that I hadn't been part of before, and that team building of a band and the discipline it takes to go out and practice every day and get that field show right or get the concert band right. And I told him, I saw him a few years ago, and I told him that every day, to this day, 50 years later, I always take time to be quiet. Quiet time, he called it, when we were in band. And we would, when we were on the buses going to a field show, he demanded that we sit in silence for the last 5 minutes of that drive to wherever we were going, and to think about what we were going to do, what our part was in the show, how we were going to execute it. And I still, to this day, do that with my radio show. What's coming up today? What's my part in it? How do I execute it? So to say that Mr. Ashby is a life-changing person for me is not an exaggeration.
I know your show prep tactics are extremely specific, planned out. I understand the quiet, and it comes out in the performance just in the way that it came out in the performance of his bands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, award winner. And that was the interesting thing, I think, too, about Grayson County High School is the first few years, the band was the one that established the reputation for Grayson County. We were the ones that were winning the awards and getting the trophies, while they were struggling at times to get that cohesiveness in sports, in baseball or basketball or football. It was the band those first few years that if you ask somebody around the state, they would go, I know the Grayson County Cougar band.
Yeah, absolutely. Were there other, you mentioned Mr. Ray, and by the way, when I got to the middle school, Mr. Ray was at the middle school, and you're right, he walked around like a drill sergeant and expected nothing but perfect behavior, but he's to be respected for that. So Mr. Ray, got Mr. Ashby. There are other faculty or staff that stand out to you from the mid-'70s?
Well, there's so many, actually. How much time do we have? But a couple that I'll mention. Miss Brenda Bryant was English teacher, and Mark, she was so. I felt like in high school she hated me because she was so strict on me. And later in life, I became friends with her as an adult. And she always told me, she said, George, I was hard on you because I knew you could do better than what you were doing. You were such a jokester that I wanted you to focus. And so I always think of her. I still stay in touch with her and message her on Facebook all the time. So she was very important. Also, Matt Stoll was a teacher of, well, I'm trying to remember. It was, at the time, we called it social sciences or political science or whatever. And he was another person that really was able to motivate me to do better. Because I got to be honest, the first couple of years there, I could pretty much get B's without studying a whole lot. I mean, it was fairly easy for me. And those were two teachers that really challenged me to step it up and get to making A's instead of just settling for a C or a B or whatever. And those were a couple of teachers that really were able to connect with me, and I think were very responsible for some of the things that I've been able to accomplish in my life. But also Dale Woosley, I had his class. I remember his math class, and mostly I remember Grayson County School had several classrooms that were like, they considered them open classrooms. There was not a complete wall between them. So if you went to the pencil sharpener, for all you young kids out there, if you went to the pencil sharpener in Dale Woosley's math class, I could talk to some of my other friends like Kevin Ferris and Glenn Renfro, who were in the other math class, and we could pass some notes back and forth. So I learned that in Dale's class, along with math. I will tell you that, but that's what I remember most.
That sounds like a favorite memory. It's an indelible memory, even if it's not necessarily a favorite. Do you have other favorite memories from that era that you still look back on fondly?
Gosh, man, so much of it, Mark, is you don't spend a whole lot of time until you start getting older. We just talked about my 50th. I just turned 65 in February, and as I look back just about how amazing it was to be on that journey and be part of those first classes. There's so many memories. Winning those trophies with the band, dating some of the girls that I dated in high school. I was way out of my class in dating there, but just some of that. One of the things I do remember most, though, is E.E. McGee. I mean, we all love Coach McGee and Red. We just think the world, and I hope he's doing well. But I remember when we first started that very first year at the school, the gymnasium wasn't finished yet. And so a lot of times they were playing some of the basketball games at Litchfield because they had the biggest, nicest gym. And I remember talking to EE about it, and I was like, man, this is stupid. This is crazy that we don't have our own gym. Why do we have to go to Litchfield? Why do we have to be part of that? I'm a Caneyville guy. So was he, by the way. And, he was one of the guys that set me down, and he said, George, you're looking at it all wrong. He said, this is the first step into a brand new world. And yes, we have to take a step back. Yes, you're going to have to be in an uncomfortable situation at a rival's gym for our home, basketball games or whatever. But he said, if you look at this right, and if you play your cards right, this can be the start of something incredible in your life. He said, you want to do more than Grayson County. And he said, this is the start right here today. And I remember it, standing in that unfinished gymnasium and talking to E.E. McGee, that it was, again, one of those moments that I look back on very fondly.
So we have the benefit, obviously, of having an extended conversation. And most people who are watching at this point are part of an extended cut watching us on YouTube. I want to ask you a question that isn't necessarily career related or GCHS 50 related, but in your moving around, living in Houston, the difference between your time in Louisville and your time in Houston, to me, probably has a lot to do with the internet and the ability to stay in touch with home in ways that maybe you've not been able to do in your career. We stay in touch thanks to the internet. I know you have a lot of classmates that follow you in your career in Houston. How nice is it to be able to be there, but also still feel like in ways you're at home?
Well, that's the promise of social media, right? I think that's the one way that social media has lived up to that promise, is to allow you to stay connected. Early in my career, I did a morning show in Seattle, Washington, and was out there for a couple of years. And it was so isolated. We were so alone. My wife and I moved out there right after we got married, and we were so isolated and away from family that it just wasn't where we wanted to be. And I think back sometimes, it's like, man, if we'd had social media and the ability to stay connected with our parents and our, brothers and sisters and stuff, because that was back when a long distance also still costs you money. Remember that? Like, you couldn't call state to state without it costing you extra. So we didn't get to call home a lot or anything. But yeah, I mean, being here in Houston and the social media aspect of what we do, also our Odyssey app, AUDACY is the app that our station is on, our company is on. And I have so many people from Grayson County, from Louisville, from all over the United States that listen to our show daily, that it really does and has changed the nature of what we do. And it has made being in Houston for 10 years now a lot easier.
So you're celebrating 50 years in radio, and you shared on Friday morning that you were a bit reticent about celebrating it because you thought that it might give you an aura of has-been, or your best days are behind you. And I would never claim that your best days are behind you, but more of them are behind you than are in front of you, even though I told you I can't wait to celebrate your 100th year in radio. You may defy the odds, and you may be the one. Say hello to the future for me when you get there. But what do you see ahead for you? I know you're loving what you're doing and you're having more fun than you've ever done. But what does late in life look like for you? What's your bucket list? What's your goal?
Well, that's a question my wife keeps telling me I need to get an answer for, right? I do have to say that the current show that I'm on with Mo and Eric on the Bull in Houston, one of the most fun shows I've ever done in my life. I'm having more fun doing radio than I've ever had. And that's crazy to think about after 50 years in radio. But yeah, I do think about it. And my wife has a little travel business that she does on the side. And I told her I'm looking forward to just being her companion when she does all these travels around the world. So I think that's what is in store for me. I'm an auctioneer now. I love auctioneering. So if anybody back in Grayson County needs an auctioneer, I am happy to come help. It's something that I grew up going to auctions with my grandpa, and it's just something that I finally got back to for me, and I really do that. So I think when it comes, I think retirement is going to be travel and auctions on my schedule, and not have to get up at 3:15 in the morning.
Of the exotic locations that Deanna has taken you to, is there one that stands out as your favorite?
Somebody came up to me today, Mark, and said, here is the plane ticket, hotel, everything. You can go anywhere in the world, anywhere in the world. The most luxurious places, whatever, you can go anywhere. I would be on a plane this afternoon back to Iceland. Yeah, wow. It's incredible. Okay. It's like a different world.
I'll have to look into that. I have a family that have been, but we haven't been. But now another endorsement for Iceland from the great George Lindsey. Hey, thanks for your time. You truly are one of the great sons and great byproducts of Grayson County High School. And we're extremely proud of you. I know the community is, and it's always an honor to speak to you.
Well, the honor is mine. Again, I was in that studio one of these days, and maybe one of these days in retirement, I'll come back and sit next to you a day or two a week. How about that?
That sounds great. It's a pleasure. This is George Lindsey, a part of our Cougar Conversation, and more Cougar football is coming up here on K105.